Emily Wallace looked like the perfect wife, graceful, charming, and devoted. But when her husband Daniel vanished without a trace, that perfect image began to crack. What police uncovered next would expose a chilling truth. Emily wasn't just hiding secrets. She was hiding a crime she thought no one would ever uncover. Emily Wallace looked like the picture of a perfect suburban wife. Every morning, she waved at the neighbors while watering her roses, her hair tied neatly, her smile effortless. People in Ridgewood admired her for keeping her home spotless and her life seemingly flawless. But beneath that calm exterior, something darker was building, an invisible tension that no one around her could see. Daniel Wallace, her husband of 8 years, had once been her entire world. He was charming, intelligent, and endlessly patient. Together, they appeared to live a dream life. But lately, Daniel's absence had become too frequent, his excuses too rehearsed, and his warmth toward Emily had faded into polite distance. It started with small things, missed dinners, unanswered texts, and long nights at work that didn't quite add up. Emily told herself it was stress, that Daniel was just tired from his demanding job as an architect. But deep down, she felt something shift between them. The laughter they used to share was gone, replaced by quiet meals and the sound of Daniel's phone buzzing with messages he never explained. To outsiders, the Wallaces still seemed like the ideal couple. But inside their home, love had turned into suspicion. You ever notice how perfect couples on the outside sometimes hide the most chaos behind closed doors? If you're watching this, drop a comment. What do you think causes someone to snap? Because, in Emily's case, no one saw it coming. On a rainy Friday evening, the calm routine of Ridgewood was shattered. Daniel didn't show up to work the next day. His co-workers thought he might have taken the weekend off, but by Sunday evening, concern turned into alarm. Daniel's best friend, Mark, decided to stop by the Wallace home to check on him. The moment he knocked on the door, he sensed something wasn't right. Emily opened it, looking pale but composed. She claimed Daniel had left 2 nights ago after a fight and hadn't returned. She told Mark she thought he needed space. But when he stepped inside, he noticed something odd: 2 plates of dinner still sitting on the table, untouched. The candles on the counter had melted down completely, as if they'd been burning for hours after no one was around to blow them out. The police were called that evening, and when they arrived, Emily appeared cooperative. She let them in, offered coffee, and recounted the story she had already told Mark. But officers immediately noticed a few strange details. The floor near the kitchen sink had faint streaks that looked like they'd been scrubbed aggressively. A single wine glass sat shattered on the tile, and leading toward the basement door was a trail so faint it was almost invisible, but under flashlight, it looked suspiciously like blood. Detectives opened the basement door, expecting maybe to find more signs of a domestic argument. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. A patch of carpet had been recently cleaned with bleach. The smell was strong enough to sting their noses. In the corner, a small puddle of diluted red was still damp, half covered by a folded towel. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. When questioned again, Emily maintained her story. Daniel left after they argued. She hadn't seen him since. Her voice didn't waver. Her hands didn't shake. She even asked if she could help put up missing posters once the police did their part. It was an impressive performance, one that made a few officers doubt their own instincts. But not Detective Laura Hayes. Something about Emily's composure didn't sit right. Most spouses in shock couldn't hide their panic so easily, Emily looked too calm, too controlled. If you've been following this far, what do you think? Was Emily really heartbroken, or was she just playing a role? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love stories that keep you guessing until the end, hit that like button so you don't miss the next part of this chilling unraveling. By Monday morning, a full missing persons report was filed. The media picked up the story. Local architect missing, wife pleads for help. Emily stood on her front porch, surrounded by flashing cameras, clutching a framed photo of Daniel. Her voice cracked as she spoke, tears glistening under the lights. To everyone watching, she was the image of a grieving wife desperate for answers. But behind those tears, there was calculation. She was carefully building her version of events, one she thought no one could challenge. Inside her spotless home, though detectives continued to collect evidence quietly, they noticed her cleaning supplies were nearly empty. A neighbor mentioned seeing Emily out in her garden late at night, digging near the flower bed even though it had rained heavily that evening. Another neighbor's doorbell camera had recorded the faint outline of someone dragging a large trash bag toward the backyard around midnight on the same night Daniel vanished. The image was blurry, but the floral robe the figure wore looked strikingly familiar. The investigation had barely begun, but cracks in Emily's story were already showing. She thought she could outsmart everyone, that her charm, her calm, and her picture-perfect reputation would protect her. But what Emily didn't know was that every lie she told was leading her closer to one truth she couldn't escape. The truth that she wasn't as invisible as she believed. The camera had seen her. The ground beneath her roses had recorded her secret, and soon the world would know exactly what kind of woman Emily Wallace really was. Detectives returned to the Wallace home early Tuesday morning with a search warrant in hand. What had begun as a missing persons case was now being treated as something far more serious. Emily greeted them with the same careful politeness she always showed, though her eyes carried a flicker of annoyance at the intrusion. She wore a cream sweater, her hair neatly pulled back, and offered them coffee again, like she had nothing to hide. But this time, the officers weren't interested in small talk. They moved methodically, photographing the basement, collecting samples from the floors, and bagging items that could hold traces of DNA. The faint odor of bleach still lingered in the air. Detective Laura Hayes observed Emily closely as she moved about the house. Every time the investigators lifted something or noted down an observation, Emily's gaze followed, watchful, calculating. She wasn't the typical distraught spouse. She was more like someone quietly assessing her chances. Outside, a small group of neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. Ridgewood wasn't used to police cars crowding driveways or crime scene tape fluttering in the wind. Later that afternoon, the detectives reviewed footage from nearby homes. One recording stood out, the grainy video from a neighbor's doorbell camera. Around midnight on the night Daniel disappeared, a figure in a floral robe could be seen dragging a large trash bag across the backyard. The image wasn't clear enough to confirm the person's identity, but everyone who knew Emily recognized that robe. It was the same one she'd been wearing during her interview with the local news just a day earlier, when the footage was shown to her. Emily laughed softly, shaking her head as if the idea was ridiculous. She claimed it wasn't her, that the footage must have been altered or the timestamp wrong. But her reaction only deepened the detectives' suspicion. They decided to bring in a forensic team to examine the backyard. The garden Emily had so proudly maintained now became the focus of their search. By the time the team started digging near the flower beds, Emily's calm demeanor had begun to fade. She watched from her kitchen window, clutching a cup of tea that had gone cold in her hands. Every shovel of dirt seemed to tighten the tension in her jaw. Then, just a few inches beneath the soil, one of the officers stopped and called for Hayes. What they uncovered wasn't a body, but it was damning nonetheless. Buried under the soft earth was Daniel's wedding ring, still caked with mud. The discovery sent ripples through the investigation. It was proof Daniel hadn't simply left as Emily had claimed. When confronted with it, she appeared momentarily stunned, her composure slipping for the first time. But within seconds, she composed herself again, insisting Daniel must have dropped it earlier while working in the yard. It was a weak explanation, and Hayes knew it. Viewers, take a second and imagine this scene: the detectives standing in a neat suburban garden, pulling evidence out of the ground while the supposed grieving wife watches from the window. What do you think was going through Emily's mind at that moment? Comment below if you think she realized right then that her secret was starting to crack. As investigators continued their search, they found other strange details. Emily's car, parked neatly in the driveway, had its interior professionally cleaned the day after Daniel vanished. The receipt from the detailing shop was still in her purse. When they questioned the cleaner, he mentioned that the trunk had smelled a bit metallic, something he couldn't quite describe. A lab test later confirmed traces of blood, faint but consistent with Daniel's DNA profile. The case that had once been a mystery was now turning into something undeniable. The police gathered everything: phone records, credit card statements, and hours of footage from traffic and security cameras. It didn't take long to piece together Emily's timeline. Her phone had been inactive for several hours the night Daniel disappeared, but her car's GPS told a different story. It showed a short trip to a wooded area outside of town around 2 in the morning. She returned home less than an hour later, when the results were presented to her. Emily's answers grew slower, her eyes shifting between the detectives as if searching for the right lie to tell next. She claimed she'd gone for a drive to clear her head, that she was upset and needed to be alone. But paired with the footage, the blood evidence, and the buried ring, her words no longer carried weight. The story began spreading through Ridgewood like wildfire. People who once admired Emily now crossed the street to avoid her. Her once perfect reputation was dissolving under suspicion. Reporters camped outside her home, cameras flashing each time she stepped out to fetch the mail. And yet she still smiled for them, pretending to be the wounded wife caught in a nightmare she didn't deserve. Detectives, however, were no longer buying her act. They quietly obtained a warrant to access her phone data more deeply. That's when they discovered a deleted message sent just 2 days before Daniel went missing. It read, "After tonight, everything will finally be mine." The message had been deleted minutes after it was sent, but Cloud Backup had preserved it. That was the moment the investigation shifted from suspicion to certainty. Emily Wallace wasn't a grieving wife. She was a planner, a manipulator, someone who believed she could control not only her husband's life, but his death. If you've been following the story so far, think about this: how many people hide dark motives behind ordinary faces? How many smiles conceal something sinister? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Because what happens next will expose just how far Emily was willing to go to protect her perfect lie. When Emily was brought in for questioning, she walked into the station with her head held high, as if she were there for an interview rather than a murder investigation. She wore a dark blue coat and carried herself with the same poise she had shown on camera during her public pleas for help. The detectives could see she was rehearsed to movement, every word chosen carefully. She smiled faintly when she sat down, crossing her legs neatly, pretending to be cooperative. But behind that calm mask, there was a quiet war happening in her mind. Detective Laura Hayes started the questioning slowly, letting Emily talk. She described her marriage, the argument she claimed she and Daniel had before he supposedly walked out, and how devastated she had been since. But her story was built on two perfect details. She spoke about Daniel packing a bag, slamming the door, and driving off in anger. The problem was, investigators already knew Daniel's car hadn't left the property that night. It was still in the garage, untouched. The detectives let her continue, taking notes quietly. Every time they presented a small inconsistency, Emily had a quick answer ready to quick. When asked about the cleaning supplies, she said she had spilled wine in the basement and tried to clean it up. When questioned about the late-night trip her GPS recorded, she claimed she drove around to calm her nerves. It was a web of explanations, each one weaker than the last. Meanwhile, forensic results were coming back. The blood found in her car trunk was confirmed to belong to Daniel. The lab also detected faint traces of human tissue under the trunk's lining, suggesting that something or someone had been moved. The findings were grim, and the evidence was mounting. Yet, Emily's expression barely changed. She blinked slowly as the detectives read the report aloud, pretending to be confused. As the questioning continued, the team decided to push further. They presented the deleted message recovered from her phone. "After tonight, everything will finally be mine." For the first time, Emily's confidence faltered. She blinked twice, her lips tightening slightly before she recovered and gave a small shrug. She claimed it was a misunderstood message to a friend about a personal project. But when detectives asked for that friend's name, she hesitated. It was the hesitation that gave her away. Outside the interview room, Hayes and her team pieced together a clear timeline. Daniel had planned to meet with his lawyer 2 days before his death to finalize divorce papers. He had also updated his will, removing Emily as the primary beneficiary. Financial records showed she had recently maxed out several credit cards and withdrawn large amounts of cash. The motive was suddenly crystal clear: money, power, and control at the same time. The digital forensics team discovered footage from a neighbor's security camera, showing Emily's car leaving the driveway around 2 a.m. and returning less than an hour later. The timing perfectly matched the GPS data. Even more telling, a partial shoe print found near the backyard matched a pair of boots Emily owned. Bit by bit, her carefully crafted story was coming apart. Still, she refused to confess. She sat in that cold interview room, sipping from a paper cup of water, pretending to be the victim of misunderstanding. But the detectives knew better. They decided to confront her one last time with visuals instead of words. They played her home security footage, recently recovered from the cloud backup of her smart home system. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed Emily entering the basement wearing gloves and carrying plastic sheets and a kitchen knife. The times, the exact night Daniel vanished. Her expression changed instantly. The color drained from her face, and her breathing grew shallow. For a moment, she seemed to lose her composure completely. She stared at the screen in silence, as if trying to process that the walls around her perfect deception were finally collapsing. She tried to speak, but no words came. That silence was louder than any confession. Detective Hayes watched her carefully. Years of experience had taught her that guilt rarely needed to be shouted. It showed itself in the smallest reactions. And in that moment, Emily Wallace's calm, perfect image was gone. What remained was the truth, the woman who thought she was smarter than everyone else, only to be undone by her own arrogance. Viewers, what do you think? Was Emily driven purely by greed, or was there something deeper, a jealousy that had been festering for years? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's chilling to think how someone can live side by side with a person they plan to destroy. After the footage was shown, Emily asked for a lawyer. The interview ended, but the case was already made. The detectives had everything they needed: motive, evidence, and the suspect's reaction. As she sat alone in the holding cell, Emily's confident posture collapsed. The mask had fallen off completely. The woman who once charmed an entire neighborhood now sat silent, realizing that every piece of her plan had worked against her. The next morning, news broke that Emily Wallace was officially being charged with the murder of her husband. Reporters surrounded the courthouse as she was led in handcuffs, her expression blank, her once perfect hair disheveled. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment the town's perfect wife became its most infamous killer. But the story wasn't over yet. Investigators still hadn't found Daniel's body, and Emily wasn't talking. Somewhere out there, hidden under the quiet hum of Ridgewood's normal life, lay the final piece of the truth. And finding it would uncover just how far Emily Wallace went to bury herself. The final phase of the investigation was as unsettling as it was revealing. With Emily now in custody, detectives focused on uncovering the last missing piece, where Daniel's body was hidden. Every clue pointed to meticulous planning. Emily hadn't acted impulsively. Every decision, every cleanup, every story she told had been designed to keep her secret buried. But like all carefully crafted lies, one overlooked detail would lead to her undoing. Digital forensics experts spent days combing through Emily's devices. One discovery stood out: a deleted folder on her laptop containing maps, property listings, and photos of wooded areas around Ridgewood. Each location was tagged with notes like quiet, isolated, and low visibility. It was enough to convince investigators that Emily had planned where to dispose of Daniel long before she carried out the act. They began searching the areas marked on her files one by one, using drones, search dogs, and ground-penetrating radar. It took 4 days to find what they were looking for. In a remote section of an abandoned construction site about 20 miles outside town, search dogs detected human remains buried beneath a layer of concrete dust and debris. The DNA matched Daniel Wallace. The way the body was found told detectives everything they needed to know about Emily's mindset. Methodical and disturbingly precise. Back at the station, Detective Laura Hayes was preparing for trial. The evidence was overwhelming: blood samples, digital traces, and most importantly, footage from Emily's own home security system. The same system she had installed to make herself feel safe had ended up documenting her crime from start to finish. It was the ultimate irony. The video showed her moving through the house with quiet determination, wrapping the basement floor with plastic sheets, and later dragging what appeared to be Daniel's body down the stairs. Each timestamp matched perfectly with the night he disappeared. When the footage was played for Emily's attorney, he knew there was no defense left strong enough to counter it. He advised her to consider a plea deal, but Emily refused. She insisted that she was innocent, that the footage was being misinterpreted, and that Daniel had been abusive. There was no record or evidence to support her claims, and her insistence only made the prosecution's case stronger. During the trial, the courtroom was packed. People from all over Ridgewood came to witness the downfall of the woman who had once represented perfection. The The prosecution presented its case step by step, laying out the sequence of events like a grim timeline. They showed the footage, the phone message, the buried ring, and the cleaning receipts. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, revealing the chilling truth of how Emily had killed her husband, tried to erase the evidence, and then pretended to be the grieving widow on live television. As the jury watched the footage of her walking into the basement, there was a collective silence in the room. Emily sat expressionless at the defense table, her eyes fixed on the screen, but her face unreadable. Her lack of reaction only deepened the sense of unease, even when her lawyer tried to argue that she had suffered a temporary breakdown. The evidence of planning made that impossible to believe. When Emily finally took the stand, her tone was steady, but her words were hollow. She claimed she had loved Daniel, that she had only wanted to protect herself. Yet every word seemed carefully rehearsed, as though she was still trying to control the narrative. The jury didn't buy it. The prosecution's closing argument made it clear. This was not the act of a desperate woman, it was the act of someone who believed she could play God and get away with it. It took less than 3 hours for the jury to reach a verdict. Emily Wallace was found guilty of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read aloud. For the first time, Emily's composure cracked. Her lips trembled, and her eyes darted toward the gallery where reporters and neighbors sat watching. Her world built on charm, deceit, and control had finally collapsed. When she was led out in handcuffs, she didn't look back. The cameras flashed, capturing her blank stare as she was escorted into the waiting police car. That image would appear on news broadcasts for weeks. The once beloved wife turned cold-blooded killer. After the trial, Detective Hayes reflected on the case that had consumed months of her life. She couldn't shake the thought that if not for one camera and a few forgotten files, Emily might have gotten away with it. It was a haunting reminder of how easily evil can hide behind normalcy. Viewers, what would you have done if you lived next door to someone like Emily Wallace, someone who smiled at you every morning, hiding the darkest truth imaginable? Comment below and let us know your thoughts. Emily began her life sentence at the state penitentiary, spending her days in silence. She refused interviews, avoided other inmates, and never spoke about the night Daniel died. Some said she still believed she could appeal the verdict, that somehow she'd find a way to twist the story again. Others thought she had finally accepted her fate. A year later, the Wallace home was sold to a new family. The garden where Daniel's ring had been found was replanted, the basement renovated. To outsiders,